Good morning, Ruben and Rajesh. Great that we could get together today. As you know, for a couple of months now, I'm in the board of NXI Therapeutics. Maybe today we talk a little bit about update, what happened in the last couple of weeks or months, of what kind of things you have been doing, whether there's any progress, any challenges.
For the first couple of discussions what we had with various investors, they were very much interested in both the dermal program as well as an oral program, and they also wanted to know what are all the key experiments what you are planning to do along those lines, and more importantly they also wanted to know how the investment would be used, what kind of various proceeds are you planning to use the money from them for the preclinical development of both these aspects.
I thought it's time to generate an additional scenario on this. We discussed briefly last week.
Exactly.
It would encompass funding a significant amount of additional
because then you go
cash.
for two clinical trials, which requires more funding than simply going for one, high risk, high reward project, but rather a de-risking project, but putting a second program into place that requires additional funding. I think is absolutely worth the investment. So I would be very much supportive in the board meeting to kind of support that. I would say this dual track with the two indications should be the plan A, really be the strategy that we move forward, because it de-risks the whole company, I guess, if we have two shots on goal, and then have a plan B and plan C in case we're not getting the full, let's say, higher financing that we require. But I mean, if I hear that it's only 4.4 million, let's say on average 5 to maybe 10 million extra, I think that is something that is worth the investment.
That is the range. It would be 4.4 just for preclinical development of the additional program. Then we move up to 9-ish. If we add 2026, the whole year, the fixed costs, the running costs, plus the clinical study in the dermatology program.
So we need to talk to professional investors, including the group that you're already talking to. And that also means they are probably a little bit more demanding in their due diligence and in requesting information documents before they come to an investment decision, like business angels or private investors, or the very early FFF, the Friends, Fools and Family investors that we also have. Including myself. Yeah, exactly, including myself, being one of the biggest fools. No, just kidding. Now we probably have to be mindful that the effort in getting the bigger funds on board is a little bit more substantial. And let's say by rule of thumb, of course, they want to see everything. That's not possible. Of course, the science is very important. The IP is super important. So the IP in the data room, ideally there should be as much information as possible. But also with regard to corporate governance, they are taking a very close look. So how's the company really organized in terms of board management? They like to see minutes of certain meetings sometimes in there. And if you remember, I mean, we had the private investors committing some money. I mean, usually they don't ask for much except for a presentation, your view, your vision, and they basically trust you because the science is solid. It's based on 10, 15 years of really solid science. I think the team is now in a great position, and having a clinical expert on board as well, I think this is a really good setup. But I think the professional investors also want to see how is this all working together, practically speaking. So I would recommend to sometimes put meeting minutes in from board meetings, maybe management team meetings if you have. Yeah, and then the IP, I think they will look very closely at IP.
Towards the end of September, we'll be filing a PCT application that builds on the two European patents that we filed end of last September. So that go back to this priority date.
Okay, and then you would like to put both of those into one PCT application. Is this what did I understand this correctly?
That is the plan.
I mean, where do you see the benefit of merging two into one, because usually what we have done in the past, we made 2 or 3 out of one, doing divisional applications and kind of creating more IP out of a single parent application so that the investors can count more patents.
The idea is to use this PCT as a platform now.
And if you use the PCT application then as a platform, as you said, that still allows you later on to do divisional applications out of that PCT application, right? Because you usually try to get the scope that you can get as a patent. So as a general strategy, you always take the, let's say the smallest claim set that you can get granted as a granted patent, because this you can kind of secure. But then you can still maintain from a PCT application, I believe, divisional applications where you continue claim sets that were not so straightforward initially, or which need more convincing of the patent examiner, or maybe crafting of the claims. That is still possible, I suppose.
That is possible, and we need to rediscuss the timing aspects with the IP lawyer. And up to that date, we also want to file new IP. Already with
it would be good if we really, and you mentioned this, that we have a special kind of half-hour really time session on the IP strategy at the upcoming board meeting.
Yes.
Because I think this will be very important and crucial for the investors to have that as solid as possible. And here we can hopefully help you a little bit with the experience that at least I had in the last 20 years with IP strategies in my last companies. Because, as I mentioned, science, IP, corporate governance is the 3 elements for investors in their due diligence. And IP being a very important one, is a very important one. If the investors want to have a professional FTO analysis that is conducted by one of their preferred IP legal counsels, the cost can easily end up at 50K. If that request comes from an investor, you should be really firm in saying, well, then you have to invest into this FTO analysis. This cannot really be put as a burden on the company as we are looking for funding. This really has to be a pre-investment, essentially, of the investors into this project. Whether they invest or not, then it's a sunk cost for them if they're not investing. But if they are investing, I mean, that is already then, of course, a very good sign that they are generally interested, that they are willing to make a pre-investment in the FTO analysis. So it's actually a positive thing if they say, well, we like your FTO analysis, but we would like to have it endorsed or maybe even upgraded with one of our IP legal experts or IP legal counsels that we trust, that we've worked with in the past. I mean, this is part of the total cost that the investors anyhow charge the company for the investment, for crafting the investment agreements, the shareholder agreement, so all the legal documents, the due diligence work, so they always try to recover the cost. And very often in investment agreements, of course, then there's a cap that is negotiated of how many costs can be recovered. I think you have seen it probably in your previous company as well. The cap for the legal costs, the IP due diligences. And so that always hurts if you get a few million and you have to pay a couple of 100,000 back to the investors. But that's totally normal.
As a board member of NXI Therapeutics, how do you see the team evolving now up to the financing round and then beyond the financing round? How do you see the role of the medical advisor whom we engaged on a consulting agreement? Would you change something in the setup there, or would you leave as is? And then we have part-time commitments in the team, as you know, too, on the financial side, for example. How do you see this evolving?
Yeah, I think for the time being, the setup is actually almost ideal. Very often, I've seen that those really good, let's say, chief medical officer candidates have their own consulting company, and they even support 2 companies at the same time. Of course, one has to make sure that there's no conflict of interest and that it's not active in the companies are not active in the same area and by any way competing. But this is something that the investors would absolutely accept. And let's say in the outside communication and presentation of the team on the website and in company presentations, I think we can present such a team member still as a full team member even if he continues on a consulting basis and potentially part-time basis. I think you can only plan, and you should put this into the budget for sure, of a budget after financing. Because then I think one can offer this, one can have the discussion beforehand. Well, what is the situation in the case that there's the significant financing coming? Are you willing to join the team as our chief medical officer? I think the chief financial officer position is set. There also maybe the offer and the question to increase his assignment or his investment into the company time-wise. When there's a financing, then it would already be a management team of 4, which would be really great, I think. I think this is often underestimated, but as we progress the company, and I've seen this in my last company, it was a big success actually to take a chief business officer on board who helps you, Ruben, also that you not have to do all the kind of business development activities, especially looking for partnerships. All the legwork in connection with going to every conference, connecting to people. If you have a good business development officer, that would also be a very important position to plan into the budget going forward. I've always underestimated that in my first company, we didn't have a chief business officer there. I said, business development I can do myself. But if you have a very good business development officer, he or she can really help you, doing a lot of legwork that you simply don't have time to do. So my previous chief business officer, and this is the biggest credit I have to give to him, is that he did a lot of legwork at conferences, including JP Morgan conference, and actually, was able to craft a first pharma deal with a company that I had no network with. So that was really coming out of his network, and we got a 20 million upfront investment. But it was not only the 20 million that we got in, which we could use for our own purposes, but it was the validation that all of a sudden there was a pharma company making a deal with us. And this started the whole process leading to the trade sale eventually. So without that person not having that deal, I think things might have gone differently. He also took over when there was not enough business development to do, operational roles. So he was very much involved and was someone who helped wherever it was necessary. So not someone who was just looking to business development, but someone who has a little bit more flexible character.
And then also moves into a COO direction
exactly,
at times.
like a CEO as well. So therefore, I was always skeptical because I had the same response that you had always to my investors, that why do I need a CBO? I do the business development myself. I know the science, I know the IP, I have to sell it. It's complex. But yeah.
Of course, many things also, we always think we can get things done.
You can.
But
absolutely.
At the end, your capacity is limited, absolutely.
It's a capacity issue. It's not a capability issue. I think you have all the capabilities. You can run the company totally by yourself, but then you will always be a bottleneck for kind of getting things done more efficiently.
In a timely fashion as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's good to have this team with the complementary expertise. And it's really not in this kind of sometimes the process that young startup companies have to go through. They can do everything themselves, and that's the crux. They can do it, but capacity-wise, they cannot.
And what's your opinion on a head CMC or a head development?
Yes, absolutely.
Because a powerful development team, I would see.
Of course, that I would see in the second line of management, kind of I would call it the still leadership. We are very much focused on formulation, finding formulation work, optimizing medicinal chemistry processes. But at some point of time, it needs to be translated into a process. And then the process needs to be adapted at contract manufacturing organization. And that is a lot of work, So it needs at least one person, if not two people, because often you have these CMC people with project expertise, with maybe technical expertise or regulatory expertise, and then you have them with the technical expertise or analytical expertise. So you need kind of almost two different breeds of CMC people that work together in order to make all of this happen. But this, I would say, is kind of at the director, associate director, VP, whatever level, that you need to define still, or we need to define still, in how we want to structure the company in terms of course, a startup company should not be hierarchical, but there should be some layers.
I think on CMC we are relatively clear that this would be quite an important role.
Crucial.
And I'm also already
Yes.
trying to push the team towards early process
Yes.
development
Yes.
because it's too late if you want to start shortly
Absolutely.
before
Yeah.
tox studies, right?
Yes, and then there's another position that is very critical if we go for clinical development. I mean, one is the manufacturing CMC, the other one is clinical operations.
Half a year to a year before you
start
enter
at
into...
least 1 or 1.5 years before you file your clinical trial application. You have to have that clinical operations person on board who actually gears up all the contracts with the investigators, the sites, the contracts with the clinical CRO, actually gets a clinical CRO into place, monitors everything, develops the budgets, also, takes track or takes care of that all documents are in place for a clinical trial application. Of course, you will have regulatory consultants, potentially. I think one has to think whether a regulatory function is necessary in-house or whether this can be done outsourced. I've always outsourced that function. So they are kind of people, and they should have a biotech pharma background, who know and they should have a network and what needs to be, let's say, contracted externally and then monitored internally so that everything goes smooth with setting up the clinical trial with regard to the manufacturing and providing the IMP, the investigational medicinal product for clinical trials, to gear up all the investigators, the clinical sites where the clinical trial is done, and to make sure that the interactions with the regulatory authorities is going smooth.
Yep.
And I think then we are covered. So then we have the management. I advertise to, I think the team of 4 plus, I would say, a chief business officer, could also be director business development, at some point of time would make sense. And then having the technical functions that we need in order to develop our programs to the clinic, separate functions as well, but then still outsource quite a bit. I could draw it out on the board for you if you like. If we think about the team, of course, you have the C-suite, which is CEO, CSO, CMO, CFO. And then we discussed that at some point of time, I think there's value in getting a chief business officer in as well. And that what we discussed below that are kind of these technical functions that you need in order to successfully develop your drug into the clinic. And you mentioned CMC, chemistry, manufacturing, and controls, but it's manufacturing of the, basically two roles. Overlooking the generation of the investigational medicinal product, the IMP, but also, I would say, the vendor management. Because there's a lot of outsourced activity, as you know. We do the research, but the manufacturing for the investigational medicinal product needs to be outsourced to vendors that can actually do the CGMP manufacturing of our drug. So it needs 1 or 2 persons in that area. Then, as I mentioned, we have ClinOps, clinical operations, and that again is for the clinical CROs. Essentially, it's also vendor management, and then the investigator sites or the clinical sites. I think I'm speaking here to the converted already. But that's quite a bit of work. And then, of course, all the document work for clinical trial application, CTA docs, clinical study protocol, investigators brochure, IMPD documents, so everything that you need for a clinical trial application. So that needs to be as critical person. And then the question mark was with regulatory affairs. Put a little bit of a question mark here because that could either be outsourced or it could be hired. I think it's good to have a regulatory a person inside to actually, like the CMC expert, the ClinOps manager, managing the outsourced activities in regulatory affairs as well, because otherwise it will all come to your plate And this can also be quite significant. And then there's one function, of course, we talked about this a minute ago, which I didn't put on here because it's not relevant for the development, but of course important for the company, which is the IP. I mean, of course, a lot of the intellectual property is managed by external legal counsels, but as the portfolio extends, you also know this becomes very expensive, and when all the office actions come in from the prosecution of the patent families, well, the external counsels like this because they can charge a lot of fees, but you have to have someone probably internally, an IP manager, who can overlook these activities. So it was always, in both of my companies, I had an IP manager hired, and both were very efficient ladies, and they have really managed the external IP legal counsels extremely well, plus controlling the costs, plus controlling, preparing all the office actions with the scientists, the experts, already sorting out what is important, what is just kind of a quick response, which is kind of a formality, and what is really content work that needs to be done. Yeah, I think this is what I can share out of my experience. And there may be more details to this, but if we keep this in mind, I think we have a good setup. And this should be presented, of course, to the investors as well when it comes to the fundraising discussions, that you have a good view and look at, that you covered all the aspects. And but they will tell you if that something is missing, they will tell you, what about CMC person, what about ClinOps? But if you preempt that discussion, I mean, then it's clear that they see that you guys have given it a lot of thought.
It was really great the way how you also structured it on the board. I could clearly see how the operations will look in the future. But what would be your take on how do we really identify the right kind of the person with the right kind of skill sets here?
Yeah.
Because so far, coming from the university, we always give a kind of an advertisement and then we interview. I realize that kind of a parameter or the overview with which we go ahead with recruiting candidates here may not be the right way to identify the best candidate.
Very different. I think, of course, I mean, you need to first really define for all of these positions that we talked about, what should be the ideal profile of a candidate that fits for a certain position in terms of experience, background. And then, of course, there come the soft factors like the personality, the character, the leadership skills or whatever, if you go for C-level, C-suite positions. So, I mean, you define your kind of criteria that you would like to see in a candidate, and this is just a wish list. You will not find any person that fits all of the parameters, of course. And then, you try to look in the network. I mean, occasionally you have to involve headhunters, which costs a lot of money. I try to avoid it as much as I can because they usually demand at least half a salary, if not sometimes a full year salary of a candidate as a search fee. And of course, they have to make a living, so they are really quite aggressive. And the bad news also is, and I don't know whether you know this, if you engage with a headhunter, even if then you have started the contract and you find a candidate yourself or from your network, you still have to pay the fee because it goes into the process. And this is the most painful because you actually identify the ideal candidate and they still get the money because, of course, they start the process and they, of course, identify candidates. And actually, they are good at this. They have a reservoir of people that they have in their networks. They are, I mean, I guess you guys get calls of headhunters as well. As soon as you show up on the website of a company, I'm pretty sure you will get calls from headhunters where they say, oh, I have this opportunity, this fits exactly your profile. Happens to me every second week or sometimes even every week that they call and I usually say, but look, I'm committed, right? But so they're quite aggressive because they have to earn money, but they're also, indeed, they are good if you don't find a candidate yourself. But I think we should always first try, we are all connected in the industry, look who do we know from our network who could fit a particular criterion, and the advantage is that we know then these people already. The investors, of course, have networks as well. So they bring their networks in, especially chief business officer. They might know someone who just became free from one company and then they said, oh, this could fit to your company. But if that pool of talent is exhausted, if there's no one there, then you have to go with recruiters or headhunters. And that comes at a price. I should also say, of course, with building an organization with these talented people also means, well, they all would like to get a piece of the share.
Absolutely.
Or a share of the piece. No, how do you say? A share of the company. So all of these people would like to get a share of the company. Of course, for that, I think you have set up an employee stock option plan, which of course, goes to the expense and dilutes all the shareholders, investors, and founders. But it's important that people who contribute to the company and to the success at the end also have an upside, and even if it's a smaller upside, because at the end, the founders will have the big upside. I mean, of course, the founder shares will also be diluted during financing. But I think there's always the easy saying, would you like to have 1% of a sausage shed or 1% of McDonald's? So, so it's the size matters at the end. And and one can easily make the math. If you have a good exit and you still own 5% of the company, it's a lot. If you extend the team and bring a person into the team, will that person increase the value?
Absolutely.
More than what you pay.
Yeah.
And then you have a great solution, right? If that person brings more value, then you the person pays for itself. Either in terms of bringing in more financing, bringing in deals, maybe selling stuff, which for us, I think, as we're in clinical development, is unheard of. We usually out-license or partner. But this, or we finance, and this brings in the capital. But if with this team you bring in more capital, as you can do yourself, then it's all fully warranted, this investment.
So now the team is going to grow, I see. More people are going to be on board.
Yes.
And that also means that you have different interests coming in,
of course,
different kind of emotions,
yes,
and personal conflicts. Probably this also you might have seen from all your previous startups.
Yeah, that is.
So how do we make sure that in the team we make sure that everybody feels that they are needed, they feel that that their expertise and input is very much valued in the company, and how do we make sure that these kind of emotional turmoils doesn't come in the path of company development?
I have two answers to this. One is it's communication, and I think this is the job of Ruben, to kind of get all of these team members constantly informed. This is the art of getting everyone into the same boat and rowing into the same direction. And I always say you cannot over-communicate. Therefore, I would say it's good to have at least once per month, maybe every second week or third week, a whole team meeting. Every person from any kind of even admin assistant, consultant, who you consider part of the team, every person who helps in the company, to give them an update where things are going. Of course, you cannot be totally transparent with every detail of kind of how the company is doing in every aspect, but giving them kind of a picture where we are heading, what are the critical things also, so that you keep them as much as part of the game as you can. And then your second question is, well, what do you do if there are some people who have different interests and who are trying to go into a different direction? That has to be monitored very carefully, because I always say if there's one bad apple in the basket, I mean, this can spoil the whole harvest. So, and I had this in previous companies where I had difficult situations, and then that's again, then you can outsource this to Ruben, the hard part of parting from a team member when you realize it's not the right person. There is a situation where sometimes you have to realize whatever energy and time I invest, it will not work out. It's the personality doesn't fit, the person doesn't fit, the qualification is not as it's supposed to be. And then I think one has to be open and honest and very clear, and without being personal or emotional, basically saying, look, this will be an uphill battle for you, this will be an uphill battle for us. It will not be fun continuing together. So we have a proposal, and then you have to kind of whatever you want to do in order to part in good terms. The team also feels that something is not right, and they feel, why should that person still be in the team when that person is not doing things for the rest of the team? So one has to then kind of take out the bad apple as quickly as possible.
Thanks a lot, Wolf.
Yeah.
So I realize it's communication.
This is tough, yeah.
Yeah.
And get ready for
And being transparent.
a lot of people management.
Well, that's the not so fun part of building a company and building a team. That yes, we are talking about all of these functions and everyone is creating value, but maybe you have sometimes a person that's not creating value, even creates damage to the company, then one has to act quickly, unfortunately. And in academia, often these people are put on some unimportant projects and they still continue. You cannot afford it in a company.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the leaders really need to take their roles.
Yes.
And provide vision.
Yes.
Talk about the direction of the ship. And then, as you said, bring people on board again.
Exactly. And keeping them on board. Because if you under-communicate, you can lose them again, right?
True.
So everyone needs to feel, and also they have to see, well, what is in for them. So there has to be a benefit. I mean, it's human nature, right? Of course, you have your salary, but then, I mean, you say, well, I'm working very hard and I want to have a piece of the success, if it's successful. And everyone should know it could be zero, that piece, right? We all have to work hard that it will be successful at the end. I always took it very seriously personally, didn't sleep well when it came to the discussions and the decision point. In the meantime, I'm totally relaxed about that. I say, well, this is life. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't work, let's talk about it. And then without being in any way personal, because if you drag things on, relationships deteriorate rather than you address it early on. Yeah. So
going actively into conflict situations.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. Confront it right at the early stage and nip it off as needed. Yeah.
There's also another thing that one should think about early on, if really something goes wrong in the development, especially when investors come on board, kind of the communication to the stakeholders.
Yep.
Jesus Christ.
Never surprise them.
Yeah, never surprise them. So not saying, I don't dare to kind of, they want to be the first to know and not find out later. Crisis communication is really important, as it is for public companies, as it is for private companies. I think everyone, if they have the right mindset, always try to find the best solution in a crisis situation. And then everyone wants to know. And this is part of being in the boat and not outside of the boat. Yeah. Having said that, it's also dangerous to communicate too early to especially investors. If, let's say, you're not 100% certain if something is not as expected or negative, and you don't know exactly yourself why and how, and you need to kind of go a little deeper into the root cause. So then, of course, it's dangerous to communicate something without having the right explanation or knowing what is really going on, because then it opens up all speculation. I had that as well in the past, and I've learned that from my board members that came from larger pharma companies. They said, well, we had an embargo that certain information would not be escalated to upper management until the whole data set was in and analyzed and blah, blah, blah. So you have to find the balance there, and there's no right or wrong. Communicating too early, bad news without knowing what was really going on is also not good. But if there is bad news, one should of course do as much root cause finding and then providing potentially already a solution or an explanation in order to not leave the door open for speculation.